Today I want to talk about the crisis of Islam. And Islam is falling on a sword. And this sword is a double-edged sword. On one side, we have the fact that there is no evidence that Muhammad, the Quran, or Islam existed before the year 697. Now, according to Muslim or Islamic traditional sources, Muhammad founded Islam in the year 622. He died 632. And then we have this traditional narrative. The problem is there's no contemporary historical evidence that the traditional Islamic narratives are true. As Yasir Qadhi says, there are holes in the narratives. In fact, there's a gigantic, big, gaping hole. And it doesn't seem like the Arab Empire was Muslim or Islamic at all until the late 600s, the late 7th century. And the other thing is, first off, we have two issues on this side of the sword. Number one, there's no contemporary historical evidence of the existence of Muhammad, of the Quran, of Islam. I mean, the early caliphs, there's no correspondence from them describing Islam or Muslims or Muhammad. There's none of this terminology until the year 697 when Caliph al-Maliki, just all of a sudden, Islam appears suddenly in the historical record. The other issue we see here is there's evidence that the Quran evolved. Now we have stories in the Islamic sources that Caliph Uthman collected all copies of the Quran and revised the Quran and burnt earlier copies so that the Quran would be unified as one standard Quran. But today, and Muslims have had it drilled in their head, there's one Quran, there's only one Quran. But the historical evidence shows differently from Islamic sources. And other indications, like John of Damascus had a Quran in front of him that seems to have been a little bit different from the Quran we have today. And then also in the Hadith and other Islamic sources, they discuss changes to the Quran, lost surahs, or which are chapters or revelations from the Quran that disappeared. So that's the issue. On here we have the lack of historical evidence and historical evidence for the evolution of the Quran. And Hatun Tash went around the Islamic world, went to Muslim bookstores, and she's found over 30 Qurans. And every Quran that she has is different from the other. And so far, I believe they have 90,000, going through all these Qurans, her and her staff have found 90,000 variations. And they just got started. So there's probably going to be tens of thousands of variations between these. We're not just talking about pronunciation issues, we're talking about different words in the text. And then we have Brubaker. He's got a site called Variant Quran where he's showing, he goes to the oldest Qurans, look at the Quran today, where you see all these changes. And on top of that, the Quran that most Muslims use today is from 1925. And Yasir Qadhi and was it Shabir Ali, something like that, I don't know the guy's name exactly. But they're just coming out and admitting it. Because what happens is Muslims have had it drilled in their heads, there's one Quran and it's never been changed, and they're finding that there's over 30 Qurans, and they're all different from each other. So what do? They realize, well, the gig is up, we're going to have to tell the truth. That there are multiple variants in the Qurans, there's not one Quran, there's a lot of differences. That's what happened with Yasir Qadhi, is Muhammad Majaba says, I want you to take a blank book and write the Quran in it. You know, would it look like the Quran we have today? So he has to, it's like, oh, well, I don't want to talk about that, because it wouldn't be. And that's another thing that Yasir Qadhi says, is I don't want to talk about these issues. Well, it's too late now. Cat's out of the bag. So now we're going to look at the other edge of the sword, and that's Islamic sources, right? The traditional Islamic sources. So first we're finding out that the Quran has been changed, it's evolved. There's tens of thousands, or probably hundreds of thousands of variants between Qurans that are used by Muslims today, among the 30 different Qurans they use. And we find textual variants going back to the most ancient Qurans. For example, they found a Quran in a dome of a mosque that was hidden away probably shortly after the time of Uthman, the Sana'a Quran, which is from Yemen, and it's vastly different from Qurans today. So we can trace the evolution of the Quran. So we have the issues here, or the lack of historical evidence for early Islam, the evidence that the Quran has evolved. So here we're realizing that perhaps what happened historically is different from what Muslims say in the traditional narrative. We have this big gaping hole. So the historical narrative doesn't seem to be true. One case in point which blows everything up is Muslim sources say that Muhammad died in the year 632, but contemporary sources describe Muhammad as being in Israel, Palestine, in the Promised Land in the year 634 and dying 3 or 4 years later. So once we realize that's a historical fact, then we realize that we can't trust anything in the traditional Muslim sources, because the historical record contradicts it, and these sources were written 100, 200 years after the supposed life of Muhammad, whoever this individual was. And we're only beginning to look at this problem. So this issue, the other edge of the sword, is, let's just say, for sake of argument, that the Quran represents the actual revelation that Muhammad got, and that the Surah and Hadith represent the life of Muhammad. So the Quran says that a man can beat his wife. According to Islamic history, Muhammad married Aisha at 6 and had sex with her at 9 years old. In the Quran, Muhammad is authorized to take his son's wife away from him and add her to his harem. According to the Hadith, Muhammad decapitated 800 Jewish men in one day. And then we have the black stone, which Muslims still venerate. I was watching a video, it's on Religion for Breakfast, about the Yazidis, and the Yazidi cult or religion is very difficult to understand. So I watched the video because they seem to be good people. I've been to Yazidi villages, but I don't understand their religion. So he tried to explain it in this video, and they have this golden peacock, which they say represents one of the archangels. They bow down before it, they kiss it, and they say, oh, it's not an idol. But from my point of view, it is an idol. I mean, I'm not saying these are bad people, I'm just looking at the point of view from a Christian. How they venerate this statue looks like idolatry to me. The way I understand it, the way idolatry is condemned to explain the Bible. So in Mecca, in the Kaaba, you have a black stone. And this stone is a Baitalist stone, which were idols. And many Middle Eastern shrines had Baitalist stones in them. And John of Damascus says that in his day, the black stone was a carved statue of Venus or Aphrodite. I think he calls the goddess Kabar, which is an Arabian sex goddess. And he says you could look at it and you can see it's a carved statue. Over the centuries, an Arabian tribe stole the black stone and broke it to pieces. So you can't tell that it's a statue anymore, but it was, according to contemporary evidence from the early 700s. So you have that issue, and then you also have the issue, and it's like John of Damascus says that in his day and age, Muslims were saying that this statue of a sex goddess, the black stone, that Muslims were saying that Abraham took Hagar and he had sex with Hagar on top of the black stone, which enabled Hagar to conceive. That's what Muslims were saying at that time. And it seems like, well, how could that be? Why could Muslims say that? Well, we have a first-hand testimony. This is what they're saying in early Islam. But then we have to look at the Hadiths, talk about the satanic verses, where Muhammad was willing to accommodate some pagan Arabian practices, such as the three daughters of Allah, as he called them, Allat, Al-Uzza, Al-Manat, three preeminent ancient Semitic pagan goddesses. So he was willing to accommodate idolatry and polytheism and paganism. That's according to Islamic sources. That the Hadith talk about the satanic verses incident. So they were going to kill Salman Rushdie for writing about the satanic verses, but this story is not something that Salman Rushdie came up with. The story is told multiple times in the Hadith, and it's very well attested. So you look at these different Hadiths, and they say, oh, well, this is a weak Hadith, this is a strong Hadith. But the satanic verses incident is a very strong Hadith. And when you look at this, it seems like historians look at something called the criterion of embarrassment. Is something historically accurate? And it's like, well, why would Muslims make these things up? Now, Tom Holland has dealt with this issue, the lack of historical evidence for Islam. For the first century of Islam, there's no evidence that Islam existed. So his theory is what happened is Caliph al-Maliki in the year 697 decides that what the Arab Empire needs, because you have Orthodox Christianity in the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. You have Zoroastrianism in the Iranian Empire, state religions. And he says, well, we need a unique Arab identity, and we need Arabian scriptures, we need an Arabian religion to compete and to make our empire strong and able to destroy the Byzantine Empire, to give us strength in that. So we look at these particular things. See, this edge, let's just say, for sake of argument, that these things which I told you about Muhammad in the Quran, which are written in the Muhammad and Quran, which are written in the Quran in the lives of Muhammad and the Hadith, are true. Muhammad seems like a heinous person, like a bloodthirsty tyrant. And some of the things in the Hadith in the Quran, like the sun sets in a muddy pool at night. Muhammad talks about Alexander the Great going to the edge of the world where he found this iron gate. Seems like a legend based on the Great Wall of China, but who knows? And there's other crazy things in the Hadith, like Muhammad says, if a fly lands in your soup, eat it, because one wing has a disease, one wing has the cure. Now, Tom Holland says all these things that we see in the Quran, which seem very strange to us, in the Hadith, the Muslims are trying to develop a law code like the Byzantines had, like the Persians had. And some of these stories, he says, well, one of the arguments I heard him say that I remember is, you take the story of Aisha. You know, why would Muhammad marry a 6-year-old and deflower her when she's 9? Well, that's because she's the daughter of Abu Bakr, the first caliph, and that shows that she was a virgin bride, and this shows that he's married to this family, and that this guy, Abu Bakr, is a true heir to Muhammad. This validates his sitting on the throne. So he's trying to explain these things that way. So Tom Holland's saying, okay, these things are all made up, but the reason why they made them up was because of legal needs that they had at that time of the Arab Empire became an Islamic empire in the late 7th, early 8th century. So you have these Muslim apologetics, right? These apologists. They go to Hyde Park at Speaker's Corner in England, and they're very aggressive. They're very, very aggressive, mean-spirited, hateful, just full of vitriol, railing against Christianity, railing against the Bible, railing against Christians. And now what's happened is Hatun Tash and others are showing them the holes in the historical narrative, something that Tom Holland talks about. And what do? Well, a lot of times they just turn tail and run, because what can they do? So the double-edged sword that Islam's going to have to deal with, number one, there's no evidence that Islam existed for almost a full century after its supposed founding. And Tom Holland and others believe that there might have been a prophet. They called him Muhammad later. Who knows who this person was? But the religion he espoused was not Islam as we know it today. That these caliphs in the late 7th, early 8th century formulated a religion for their needs in their time. So that's according to Tom Holland and other scholars who study this. And the thing that's interesting about Tom Holland is he was just trying to write a book on the life of Muhammad, looking at the early sources. And he finds out there's no early sources. And that the sources we have contradict the Muslim standard narratives. So the first problem is lack of evidence that Islam existed for its first 100 years, and evidence that the Quran has evolved over time. Secondly, the offensive contents of the Quran, offensive to modern sensibilities, offensive aspects of Muhammad's life and behavior, based on what Muslims wrote about him. And this is nothing new. People have written about how there's no evidence for Muhammad for the first century. And what I thought is like, who would make this stuff up? You know, who would make up a story about him, you know, killing people that criticized him, massacring all those Jews that he's accredited with doing? It seemed like, well, why would people like allowing Muslims for several weeks or months to pray to pagan goddesses? It's like, well, why would people make up these embarrassing things about the life of Muhammad? Surely these stories must be true. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. What we're going to have to do is look at what we know from the first century of the Islamic Empire, what people are saying in the 600s, non-Muslim sources, put all that data together, and then evaluate later sources and see what is more likely or less likely. So we have to apply a healthy bit of skepticism towards the Quran and towards the Hadith, because it seems like a lot of the stories there are fabricated. And that's been proven by the fact that Muhammad did not die in 632 in Medina. He died in the Near East, in Israel, Jordan, Syria, somewhere in that region, after the year 634. And that blows everything up, really. So like I said, this is not a new issue, but I figured that the stories must be true because they're so offensive to sensibilities. So what are Muslims going to do? They're falling on this two-edged sword that you have somebody goes to Speaker's Corner, and we just go through what Muhammad did according to their sources, and we could look at places in the Quran. It's like, you're a Muslim. Would you do this? Look at this text here. It's from the Hadith. This is from an official source of Islam. This is something that you as a Muslim are obligated to believe. What do you think about that? Do you think this is perfect behavior? See, that's the problem. The challenge that Islam faces, because the Quran is supposed to be the final and perfect revelation of the will of God for all time. And Muhammad is supposed to be the perfect man and a code of behavior, an example of behavior for all people to emulate. So here he is massacring a Jewish tribe, taking women as prisoners and raping them, collecting a harem, sex slaves, saying that Allah says you can beat your wife in the Quran. What do you do about that? You just ask somebody, would you hit your wife? Do you think it's okay to beat your wife? Well, the Quran says, what do they do? I mean, it's in their early text. They have an issue here. So, what if Tom Holland's right? Then how can you believe it? If it's not factually true, why believe in it? So, if it is factually true, it's offensive to morality. If it isn't, why believe in it? Why follow this religion if it's not historically true? So that's the challenge they faced. And how do they respond to this? Well, before, what they do is they threaten to kill you, or they can call you an Islamophobe, right? But that's not going to work anymore. And why not? Well, first off, we have a new phenomenon of probably hundreds of thousands of Muslims are leaving Islam. That's just a fact. They're saying that 25% of Muslim young people born in the first generation born in these countries these Muslim families are immigrating to, so they have their children, and out of the first generation born in America or Europe, 25% of this Islamic generation are apostatizing. They're leaving Islam. And then there are new organizations like Ex-Muslims North America, where they're coming out of Islam, they're forming a society, and they have like group sessions. They talk about why they left Islam, and they're networking, and they're supporting each other, because there's no thing about Islam, especially in the Middle East. If you leave the religion, you could be put to death. And here in America, you could be ostracized. We have honor killings here in the States. We just had a man who killed his two daughters because they weren't sufficiently Islamic. I think it was in Dallas. They just captured him. He's been on the run for over 10 years. They captured him just a couple weeks ago. So if you leave Islam, your life could be in danger. So that's why we have these organizations like Ex-Muslims in North America, so that Muslims leaving Islam, ex-Muslims, have a voice. And then we have people like the Apostate Prophet with YouTube channels explaining why they left, and other groups where they're actually ridiculing the beliefs of Islam. And with the apostate prophet, he was a very religious, very devout Muslim. And then he started asking questions, thinking about it critically, and his faith in Islam collapsed like a house of cards. And these people, they get tens or hundreds of thousands of views on their YouTube programs, and they're being viewed around the world, in Pakistan, in the Islamic community, in India. So it's making a big difference. I mean, this is what is really happening. And then you have David Wood and other Christian apologetics, Sam Shamoun, where they're discussing these issues. And what do Muslims do? Sam Shamoun is very aggressive on this and just destroys Islam. He's not taking this position where it's he's just saying, okay, let's look at your sources, let's look at what you're saying, and it's indefensible. And the third issue is people like academics like Tom Holland. Tom Holland is interested in is a purely academic level, right? That's what he's interested in research and information. He doesn't care about the truth or non-truth of Islam. He's looking at it as a historian. So he goes to the historical record, nothing's there. And first-hand sources contradict the official traditional Islamic account, which was written 200 years later. So contemporary sources, they don't talk about Muhammad, they don't talk about Islam, they don't talk about Muslims. That doesn't come till much, much later, probably after Caliph Malaki or somebody else formulated this religion. So then you have the academics. And this is kind of ironic. Saudi Arabia started all these Muslim schools of Islam in Yale and Harvard. And you got these scholars who are looking at the Quran, the life of Muhammad, from an academic perspective. And with applying critical thinking. Yasser Qadhi talks about this. He says, you know, with us, we look at the Quran, we don't understand something, well, we just accept it by faith. These people don't believe in it, they're just looking at it as an intellectual pursuit. So they're going to go wherever the rabbit trail leads to, as Tom Holland did. And it turns out that a lot of things that Muslims say about Muhammad probably never happened, and the Quran's evolved over the centuries. So what are you going to do? They founded these schools of Islamic studies, and now the scholars are asking troubling questions for Muslims, and we're going to be able to get the answers to these questions eventually. And it's not going to match the traditional Islamic narrative. So what are they going to do? It's a sword. Are they going to scream out, "You're an Islamophobe, you're an Islamophobe, you're an Islamophobe," when information is out there now that's accessible to the public, that ex-Muslims or Muslims are discovering these facts and are leaving Islam, and they're organizing organizations to speak on these issues, where you have anti-Muslim, ex-Muslim anti-Muslim activists like Apostate Prophet and others as well. Was it Harris Sultan and others? There's many, and there's going to be many, many more as time goes on, and these facts are dealt with. And then you have Christian apologists like David Wood. And the interesting thing about some of it, you know, he talks about, well, my programs have been banned in Pakistan, let's look at what they are. And sometimes what they ban is an open Quran or open, you know, Sahih Muslim or Bukhari. So he opens the Hadith, and it's got the Arabic on one side, the English on the other, and he puts it in a YouTube video for the world to see, and it's harmful to Islam, but it's in their official Muslim text. So all he does is read what the Quran says or what the Hadith says, and it's so offensive to just human sensibilities. And then it could cause Muslims to leave their faith, and many are. So Pakistan takes out videos of all he does is just read the Quran or the Hadith, and he just puts the text on the screen. And radical Muslim countries want those videos taken down, lest Muslims see it, hear it, and read it. And they can actually see the Arabic text and read it for themselves. And that's what Hatun Tash does a lot of times. Oh, you speak Arabic, read it. Tell me what it says. Oh, they turn and run away. So this problem isn't going to go away. It's not. It's a double-edged sword. On one side, you have the traditional narrative which is causing many Muslims, when they are encountering what the text says in the Quran, the Hadith, and the Surah. On the other hand, we find as Yasir Qadhi says, the holes in the narrative, where you have a big, wide, gaping hole where there's no proof that Islam existed at all in the 600s. So, what's going to happen? Muslims are just going to have to find a way to deal with this. Probably what's going to happen is we see this huge movement of radical Muslims, of radical Islam. We've seen it since before 9/11, and I think it's going to weaken and peter out the more people know. Knowledge is power. Jesus said you should know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And the light of truth is being shined on Islam, and they're just going to have to deal with this. And it's interesting how the facts of what they've included in their traditional narrative and the facts of the lack of evidence of the existence of Islam and evidence for the evolution of the Quran, the fact that we have 30 different Qurans that Muslims are using all around the world with tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of variants. I wouldn't be surprised, but between 30 Qurans and the different manuscripts we have around the world, you might find millions of variants between all these Qurans. So the light of truth is being shined upon them, and I think Islam's going to have to deal with these realities. And shouting Islamophobe isn't going to work anymore, because David Wood doesn't care if you call him Islamophobe. Neither does Apostate Prophet. And how many people are you going to kill? Are you going to kill all the ex-Muslims of North America? Are you going to kill David Wood and Apostate Prophet? And what are you going to do when there's like thousands or tens of thousands of videos dealing with these issues? It's just not practical. Violence is not the solution. And that's not going to help them to escape from the problem. The problem is we have factual concerns, and they're going to have to address the facts. And I think that what we're going to see is a weakening of the force of Islam and radicalism around the world. And that's a good thing, I think, because we've had war, I've seen it. I've seen soldiers blown up, dead, killed in post-traumatic stress syndrome, dealing with radical Islam. So if this isn't what God has said, if it's uncertain, why fight, kill, and die for it? Is it worth it? Is it true? And it doesn't seem to be. So now's the time for change. And of course, there's a God of love. Jesus taught that God is our loving Father, our Abba Father. There's a better way. And I hope that you should seek the truth. You should know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And I believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. There's a sword that's piercing Islam right now. And the sword, one side of this double-edged sword is the holes in the narrative, and the other side of the double-edged sword is the narrative itself. And it's destroying the faith of many Muslims. And I think we're seeing a new movement of millions of Muslims out of Islam.